but welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this month's event in our National Child Traumatic Stress Network Complex Trauma Speaker Series featuring Dr. Richard Kagan. The series is being organized by the NCTSN Complex Trauma Working Group, and it's made possible through funding from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And our schedule of events, as well as presentation materials, links to previously recorded presentations, and so forth, are all available on the Complex Trauma Series webpage, which I've just been mentioning a few times. That's www.nctsn.org/complextrauma. And as I was mentioning for those on the line earlier, this is the last scheduled session, or the last scheduled presentation in this series, although we may be continuing again in the fall with some additional topics, and with possibly some, I believe, some additional series on other topics in child and adolescent traumatic stress. So please check back on our website at www.nctsn.org for more information about kind of an extension for this series, as well as other series that are in the works. My name is Jennifer Mays. I apologize for not introducing myself earlier. I'm with the National Center for Child Traumatic Stress, and I'll be moderating today's event together with Susan Coe, who is the NCCTS Program Director for Service Systems. She'll be handling the question and answer portion of the event later on this morning, or this afternoon, I guess, if you're on the East Coast. A few more housekeeping items. Please keep in mind that if you have any problems or questions, you can email me at question@nctsn.org at any time during the presentation. And later on in the presentation, when we get to the question and answer portion, please go ahead and email questions for Dr. Kagan to that same email address, question@nctsn.org. And again, those of you who are still looking for the slide materials for the call, those are available on the website. On that Complex Trauma Series page, we've posted two versions. One has one slide per page, and the other has 6 slides per page for those who are trying to print out the handouts for today. On the website, there's also information about how to register for continuing education credits for social workers, psychologists, and counselors. Hopefully many of you have been able to take advantage of that for previous events in this series. And for those of you who are joining via the web, you can also send questions to the speaker or alert us about technical issues using the Ask function, which is a button just above the video window on the left side of the screen. So for those listening through the web, you can either use the Ask function to pose questions, or again, just email us at question@nctsn.org. Lastly, I want to ask everyone to please complete the participant survey after this call. We'll email the speaker series list and post the survey link on the Complex Trauma Series webpage. As part of this survey for the final presentation in our series, we would very much like your feedback on additional topics that you would like to see addressed in future presentations. So there is a place on the participant survey to give us feedback in that regard. So again, thank you for listening to all those announcements, and thank you for your participation. Now I am going to briefly introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Richard Kagan, who will be speaking about real-life heroes, rebuilding attachments for children with complex trauma. Dr. Kagan is Director of Psychological Services at Parsons Child and Family Center in Albany, New York, and he served as Clinical Director and Principal Investigator for Parsons Trauma Center, a community service site for the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. He's the author and co-author of 6 books about child and family services, including Real Life Heroes, a life storybook for children, and the Real Life Heroes Practitioners Manual. He's also published over 25 articles, chapters, and papers on practice and research issues in trauma therapy, child welfare, foster care, adoption, professional development, program evaluation, and quality improvement in family service agencies. Dr. Kagan's presentations, articles, and books highlight practical and innovative approaches that practitioners can utilize to help traumatized children and families. Dr. Kagan, thank you for joining us for the final presentation in the NCTSN Complex Trauma Speaker Series. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone. I wanted to begin my slides, and hopefully they'll appear on my screen as well. Actually, I don't have any slides yet. I'm hoping they're appearing. And I want to welcome you to our presentation on rebuilding attachments and trust using the real-life heroes model. And I see my own screen is sort of a little distorted, but let's go on to the next slide. And I'll keep continuing to say next slide, so I'll put it interrupt with people. I want to make a couple of disclosures as we begin. And again, please go to the next slide. I guess it's not moving for me.
Dr. Kagan, I'll just let you know that folks who are listening over the web, they're on about a 10-second delay. So they're hearing the audio and I guess seeing the PowerPoints at about a 10-second delay to those who are listening on the phone, which is why we usually ask people not to do both because it can get confusing.
Okay, and I'm trying to watch on the web as well, I guess. And,
right. So the slides hopefully are advancing. And again, if folks out there do have any technical issues or you're feeling like they're not advancing and they should be, please just email us at question@nctsn.org or just push the ask button.
Okay, my slide isn't advancing. I'll go ahead and try to slide to advance. I want to welcome everybody. I want to start out with a couple of disclosures. First of all, it's the first time I've ever done a teleconference, as you can hear. I'm a little nervous. It feels awkward to me. Second, like other authors, I do get royalties for some of the books that I've written. Third, I hope you'll hear a lot of adaptations in this presentation from my mentors, including many in the Trauma Network, including Julian Ford, and previous presenters in this series, such as Bessel van der Kolk, John Breer, Cheryl Ventry, and others, as well as a lot of mentors that I've learned from the family systems and child welfare field. And third, I have a little cold, so I may come across as hoarse. Now, I notice my slides haven't yet advanced, so I'm hoping that that's working for you, and I may turn to another way to look at my presentation. I'm hoping we're onto the slides of the agenda, and I'm actually going to turn to my own presentation. What I'm hoping to cover today, and it's a little hard as the slides don't seem to be advancing, but I'm hoping to cover today a number of things. And so I hope you'll bear with me as I bring up my own slideshow so I can see what I'm looking at here. And hopefully, for those of you over there, it's working better. Hoping to cover today traumatic stress, the impact of abuse and neglect, family violence, and abandonment of children. A quick review of core components of effective therapies for complex trauma as outlined by the Complex Trauma Work Group, and really focus on the challenge of engaging children and families in this work so we can help them. So I'm going on to the next slide, which is slide 3, that that we'll look at therapy as a shared journey and a hero's quest using Joseph Campbell's model. We'll be talking about real-life heroes and the principles, methods, pilot study for real-life heroes, and service planning for complex trauma and child and family services. Going to the next slide. So I want to begin with how the children and family typically come to me in a child and family service agency where almost 99% of the children referred are involuntary, mandated, typically don't have safe homes or a committed, safe, stable parent figure who is able or willing to work with them in therapy. So we begin often, what I see in most of our programs, whether they're mental health or social services, juvenile justice, is a gap between children and parents that's developed. A gap that includes, seems to be focused on abuse, like to have developed from the abuse, abandonments, losses, and chronic neglect these children have experienced. And families marked, as I'm sure many of you are experiencing, we found in our surveys in the Complex Trauma Work Group, with multiple crises, lack of safety, and from the child's perspective, a sense that the adult world appears out of control, especially in this time and place in our world. And when that happens, children often feel they must be in control. Let's go on to the next slide. And we want to use the definitions of traumatic stress in the field but emphasize what we see in child welfare, which is that children have often lived with very real, or from their perception, very real threats to life of the people they love, whether they've seen blood, guns, knives. And this has resulted in what we often see in terms of the impairment of their ability to modulate their arousal, avoidance, re-experiencing, and reenactments. And then they've often developed coping strategies, which then we see operating from generation to generation, and all too often generating cycles of neglect and abuse and domestic violence. Go on to the next slide. I'm moving very quickly as I've given a lot of slides of background information, and if you're interested. For children, of course, this is particularly difficult when the people they turn to naturally for comfort are also at times the people that can be a source of terror. Go on to the next slide. And when that happens, often we have children who grow up learning some very, very powerful lessons. And that includes, we often see in child and family services, that children have learned they can't trust, and that adults could hurt them and make them scared and even take away their home. So children learn some powerful lessons. And that includes, you don't believe what people say. It's a dangerous world. They need to be in charge. They need to be on guard. These are coping strategies. They also often look to peers for love and identity. And then they use violence to gain power. Let's go on to the next slide. And already covered in this series, presenters talk about how experiences shape the brain, so I'm not going to cover that, although it's fascinating. We know that's impacts. We'll go on to the next slide. What I want to focus on today is how we can use an understanding of the impact of attachments to understand what's happened to children, share that with adults, and help children to develop skills for resilience and overcoming. And so we know from the literature and research that attachments with the child's primary caregivers are very powerful in terms of determining how children regulate their bodily feelings, how they develop the ability to express emotion, how they develop feelings of self-worth, and the capacity for creativity, and the ability to learn to accurately appraise and cope with this. Let's go on to the next slide. We know, conversely, that many of the children we see, and I would say a huge percentage in child welfare, have what we talk about as chaotic, disorganized attachment. And Bessel van der Kolk's already talked about that as fright without solution, which I think is a good way to capture that. What we see typically in referrals, whether it's for acute mental health services or child and family services, are children who show poor abilities to reason and function, memory fragmentation, and lack of the ability to coordinate their senses, dissociation, and affect dysregulation. So the next slide. And I want to talk about very briefly some very exciting research just published by Marilyn Cotre and her colleagues, because that helps to substantiate what many have seen and believed in this field about how maltreatment during childhood, and along with insecure attachments, leads to this diminished capacity for negative affect regulation that we often see. And this serves as a pathway to impairment in adolescents and young adults. And, of course, there's been many studies already that have shown how impaired attachments are correlated with adult disorders for anxiety, eating, mood, personality disorders, etc. Go on to the next slide. And in the complex trauma work group, definitions from the white paper and in work group discussions, we've been focusing on some of these components, including how these experiences of multiple prolonged traumatic events, including early and severe neglect, emotional abuse, sexual and physical abuse, etc., tied in with impaired attachment, lead to decreased emotion regulation capacity, and how these symptoms then extend above and beyond PTSD. So I'm just going to skip ahead, because I'm going to cover a lot today. In child and family services, this is particularly difficult because we see children who've often come in and out of placements or living with the threat that they may have to leave their home, and often have the sense that they don't know where they'll be, a lack of permanence. And they often lack validation, lack protection by parents, relatives, and by community authorities who have not yet heard or believed their story. and we often see as behaviors leading to referral: hyperarousal, children on guard, impulsivity, high reactivity, etc., along with low verbal reasoning and low verbal modulation skills. Let's go on to the next slide. So it's not surprising that some of the effects we see, such as the Casey Family Services research, which found that twice the rate of PTSD in children in foster family care than in returning soldiers. And we also see that behaviors that we know from the research are tied to traumatic stress may often be confused with defiance or an internal mental disorder, when in fact these behaviors can be seen and often have been found to be coping devices that children have developed to manage the effects of living with chaotic, disorganized attachments and adverse childhood experiences. Next slide. So now the complex trauma work group in our white paper talked about 6 core treatment components for complex trauma, and I've listed this on the slide: safety, self-regulation, relational engagement, self-reflective information, positive affect enhancement, and trauma experience integration. It's a lot to work on. What I want to talk about today is how we can use curriculum models such as Real Life Heroes as a tool to help engage children and caring adults for this journey, and at the same time address these core components needed for therapy with complex trauma. And Real Life Heroes was tested and developed with children and families, again, who experienced multiple forms of traumatic stress and lacked safe homes and secure relationships. So what we're talking about here, and I'm going to move ahead again to the next slide, is going on a quest, a hero's quest, a quest to help transform these troubled children into tomorrow's heroes. I want to use the model of the quest as a way to engage not only the children, but the caring adults and practitioners and agencies to go on what many see as something too scary to address. Go on to the next slide. And this is a really developmentally oriented journey. Hopefully we can see it as a journey. And we want to address here 3 components, 3 main areas: rebuilding attachments, building personal power, and reducing traumatic stress. Next slide. And within those components, I want to address some of the key things we need to work on in complex trauma therapy. So under rebuilding attachments, we think about safety and attunement, reattunement. In terms of personal power, we're going to be addressing affect regulation, using mindfulness centering activities, talking about storytelling, and reintegration of the child, not only with their family, but also with their cultural heritage, where they often have a major cutoff. We're going to be talking about then traumatic stress reduction, including many CBT techniques and desensitization. Next slide. So this is a developmental attachment-centered curriculum, and one of the main emphases here is to rekindle hope. And rekindle hope by encouragement, focusing on courage and empowerment of caring adults so we can find, recruit, and enable to help children overcome traumas. So let's go on to the next slide. And we start this process with an integrated service plan and assessment. And when we do an assessment, we're thinking in terms of a family community systems orientation, searching everywhere for people who care about a child and are committed enough to that child to help them overcome traumas. So we look at 6 components, and at least 6 components in a brief assessment: attachments, traumas experienced, the developmental age of the child, strengths that the child and the family show, including strengths in the culture and community, goals for the child and parents and other caring adults involved with that child, and triggers and traumatic stress reactions. We use that then to formulate a service plan to help prioritize where we need to work. And that often needs to focus initially in child and welfare services on safety and developing safety plans. But we're always also working on rebuilding attachments and the skill building needed for desensitization and to help that child succeed. And at the same time, a 4th objective of reintegrating that child both with a positive identity and with their family and heritage and a sense of future. Let's go on to the next slide. So in this slide, I've included a genogram and an ecogram and timeline combination that we use as a quick start, search through the community and service providers and other caring adults for people who are caring enough for the child, and to give a quick orientation to what's led that child to come to this moment, this time, this referral to a clinic, agency, service provider. Let's go to the next slide. And from there, we can begin to address the 6 components identified in the complex trauma white paper. So we do this beginning again with safety, and we're going to do that in Real Life Heroes by working chapter by chapter, slowly, to make it safe enough to do the work necessary to rebuild attachments, to reinstill hope, and to engage caring adults to share in this work with children. This is a doing with process to make it safe enough, and hopefully to expand, as Breer talks about, the window of tolerance by making it safe through the different activities that we're going to do. Let's go to the next slide. And we have a practitioner's manual, about 200 pages, that's filled with tools. It includes objectives, principles, step-by-step guidelines, pitfalls to watch out for, checkpoints, and troubleshooting tips. And this can be used either to add on to other therapeutic models that you may be working with, or as an overarching therapeutic guide to work with children. So we're going to be working again at focusing now on how we use this for safety. We include stopping signals, we include a focus on creative arts, and a lot of your generally CBT safety criteria. Let's go on to the next slide. The idea with the workbook is to engage. Children, especially in the developmental age that we're targeting, 6 to 12, typically are used to working in workbooks in school, feel comfortable with workbooks, see that it has a beginning and an end. It's not like unending therapy that's going to pull out all my pain and shame, and that it's very focused on skill building. It also makes it very much safer for caring adults and practitioners to address the key components of complex trauma. So that's on the next slide. One of our children suggested that we make this into a bookmark in terms of the structure of each session, which we use to address, and again, make it safe enough for children to start to do this work and to expand their feelings of safety. So let's go on to the next slide. What the bookmark covers and what this next slide shows are this beginning of this session structure. And we begin each session, and we try to provide a structure in a session to make it a very special time and a caring time where a child can feel this is a different world, using, again, the Joseph Campbell metaphors, where I can go on a journey and a process of change. We begin that then with a series of steps to make this a special time that we do each session. And again, this is tailored to each child and to each family, their own cultural background, and what works with them, building on their talents and strengths. We usually begin with thermometers to do a self-monitoring exercise. And we use thermometers to measure levels of stress, which we talk about in terms of knots. Up to 10 knots, so you feel all knotted up to no knots. And we use a sense of personal power to address self-control in terms of feeling, again, with 10 being the maximum and 0 having no self-control. We do a quick look to see how level of stress matches level of self-control in terms of determining what to do next. We also address general feelings of feeling mad, glad, and sad. So we begin with a personal body scanning and self-monitoring process that's often used in CBT. And then we make sure their safety plans are in place. And then we try to make this a very special time with a magical moment and exercises on focusing and centering. And this can be many different things, adapted, again, to the interests and talents of both the practitioner and the child and any caring adults that are safe that we can bring into the room. We may use a magic trick. We may use herbal tea. We may use mindfulness tasting exercise with dark chocolate. We might use blowing bubbles. And we try to tie that in with then a centering exercise that builds in the skills these children need to develop for self-regulation each session, such as a deep breathing exercise, blowing bubbles, and tying that in with deep breathing, balancing, juggling, and a number of other things. Let's go on to the next slide. So each page, again, follows the same outline. And most of it is going to be nonverbal work. We ask a child to pick a color and a marker, to sketch an image for that page. And I'll give you some examples in a moment. And so you might imagine asking a child then to draw a picture of a Band-Aid with a hero figure on it. And then we ask the child to do that without any words. And then, looking at their picture, to take a drum that we have or that they create, and I'm just going to make a couple taps here, to tap out a rhythm and that would go with that image. And we ask them to tap out that rhythm, and then we're going to ask them to match that with tones from a simple xylophone or a keyboard, or for more musically inclined children, perhaps a guitar, and then to follow that with some kind of a movement that ties in with abilities and developmental level of that child. That could be a dance for some of our dancing inclined children. It could be making gestures with their face or hands. It could be taking a puppet and doing an enactment in a more play therapy process. This is all done asking the child not to use any words and to share it. And if we have a caring adult that's safe enough to be in the room, we then ask them at each step to copy the child in a basic music therapy paradigm. So if the child makes up a rhythm, we would ask the parent person, the caring adult who wants to develop a stronger attunement with that child, to literally copy that rhythm with the child. And similarly, if the child makes up some tones, I don't know if you can hear that, we would ask then the adult to copy those tones and literally to attune to that child. And what we're doing here, as you can see, is to really, hopefully, through creative arts, lengthen the time and expand the window of tolerance that these children and their caring adults and the practitioners can have for addressing these issues. And most of the workbook is all about regaining memories and feelings of strength and confidence that typically have been lost with trauma. So again, the first process is nonverbal, is asking them to do these things and then to have a caring adult attune with them. And then after that, we ask for the words. We ask them their thoughts, their beliefs, and we can then address dysfunctional beliefs in a more CBT format. And for any of these modalities, whether it's music or rhythm or movement or verbal story, the therapist can ask the child to go on and make it into more of a flowing story, whether it's a movement story or intonation story or art story, to share more and essentially to extend that. Let's go on to the next slide. So then, at the end of each slide, we ask for, we repeat at the end of each page, we repeat the self-monitoring, and if necessary, we would do some focusing centering exercises, we do some reassurance, and we give them homework that's hopefully going to build on the skills and relationship activities that we've started. So if we're talking about feeling recognition, we might have the child take a digital camera and take pictures of people in their family showing different feelings. Let's move on to the next slide. So emphasizing here again how we use these techniques for safety in terms of the first component in complex trauma therapy. And one of the key parts here is a safety bag. And we use the 5 senses safety plan that is from Target, I think from DBT, emphasizing how a child uses their eyes, their ears, smell, every touch, every aspect to help them become safe, and that they would practice that with caring adults. Let's go on to the next slide. So I want to address now the second component in the complex trauma white paper talked about in terms of effective components in trauma therapy, complex trauma therapy, and how we address that in real-life heroes. So we're going to focus on self-regulation through activities, and hopefully fun activities, things that kids and caring adults can enjoy. So we do anything that they may like, whether it's juggling or balancing or dancing or passing a bucket or tin can between their feet without any words to each other and back and forth without dropping it, anything that can be done. And then we enhance that with the deep breathing and self-regulation skill building that we use typically is found in CBT. So let's go to the next slide. This is the peacock. I learned to use peacock feathers from Robert Macy. And let's go on to the next slide. So this is, of course, is magic in itself. Why does a peacock feather have what looks like an eye at the end? Why does a peacock spread its feathers? The whole thing about peacocks is magical to children. And we want to recreate that sense of wonderment and learning that children can use to expand and grow. And when we do balancing, let's go on to the next slide. The peacock feather, what we're trying to do is teach them self-control skills. So we're teaching them deep breathing, and centering, and balance, mindfulness, where to focus their eyes, where to focus their ears. And children often excel in this and then can become leaders in teaching caring adults, including practitioners, how to better work, balance, and modulate. So we can make this into conjoint activities within with family members that they also can practice at home. So we address this in Real Life Heroes, the self-regulation task, as a matter of gaining personal power. And this includes building a sense of building skills that heroes use. And that's where we address the affect recognition, the self-control, and how we tie that in with identity, including changing from being a victim or victimizer to a hero, and how we grow a positive self-image by helping others and developing skills. So let's go on to the next slide. And tying it in with the heroes of the child, we want to use the sense that they're doing it not alone, which is how so many of our children often feel, isolated and fragmented and fearing they're losing their family. So this is, of course, a quote from Star Wars, which works very well. But we want to work with the heroes the child has to help them get the sense they're not alone, and they always have somebody with them, and the force to be with them, and they're developing strength. Using that image. But continuing with personal power, and then going on to the next slide, we're focusing again on tying that child to others. So the personal power comes from not being alone, but learning and engagement with others. Let's go on to the next slide. And with that, we're going to develop skills for management of arousal, reaction, and helping children to be able to modulate themselves. And of course, the thermometers play a nice role in this process. So here we can use in this process and activities the adults as models to lead the way to become aware of feelings, to locate triggers, and to learn to manage without dysregulation and in this process. So again, how we use sense of personal power. Let's go on to the next slide. So we use personal power then to manage difficult emotions. I hope we're on the same slide I'm on. And this includes adapting. We've adapted some of the DBT techniques, such as practicing emotional opposites. So we want to help children learn these skills that are included in many of the adult CBT and DBT approaches to these kind of difficulties. And we do that with practice and nonverbal and creative arts. Let's go on to the next slide. I'm skimming through, obviously, very quickly, but I'll leave these slides will be online for anybody who wants to go back to them. And they're also included, again, in step-by-step details in the workbooks and manual. The next part of personal power is social skill development, which our children so much lack. And we want to help them to redevelop or to develop a sense of how they can manage and succeed in dealing with the world around them. And that includes often, for our children, just beginning to recognize what feelings other people are showing instead of seeing everybody as mad or everybody out to get them or nobody they can trust. And the heroes, again, the metaphor of the hero can help them do this. So whoever they might identify with, we can help them to utilize the skills of that person to develop personal power. Let's go on to the next slide. The last part of the personal power image that we're focusing on is the identity of the child developing into a hero, him or herself, someone who does things that helps others. So right now, current hero picture coming out at this point is Batman, which makes a great image in terms of, those of you who know the Batman story or the Batman Joker story in particular, is what do you do when you have a traumatic, tragic past? Do you use that to justify creating pain or chaos, or do you use that to help the world? So we're going to try to develop a sense of, in each child, and the sense in, through their caring adults, to move on and care for others. And we do that by helping caring adults become leaders and heroes for each child. And to do that, when you often have adults who are frustrated, overwhelmed, and distressed themselves, is we want them to be ahead of the stage of the game. And we do that by a lot of psychoeducation on what has led their children to develop the behaviors they have. So we use psychoeducation on the stages of development, impact of trauma, how to work from the child's level of development, whether their child is 15 and acting like a 2-year-old, or an 18-year-old husky lad who needs to play with Legos, or a child who needs to literally hold a bottle or rub pencil fabrics to calm down. We're going to work with that cycle and that understanding. And we're going to work sequentially again on building these skills. Go to the next slide. So it's chapter by chapter, stronger and stronger. And let's go to the next slide. And the image we have here then, that we hope children will identify with, is the sense that by doing the chapters of the book, essentially doing the skill-building exercises and activities in trauma therapy, they will grow stronger and stronger. Let's go to the next slide. The third aspect of the identified in the white paper includes focusing on relational engagement and attachment. And what I'm stressing here is that every activity we do in this process is meant as an opportunity to repair breaks in attachment and to provide a chance for adults to attune or to reattune with children. And we also do that in homework. Let's go to the next slide. And the stress here then is and we want adults to know, is that by doing this, we can hopefully, and what the research has been showing, is that attuned communication grows the midline orbital frontal areas of the brain. We want our adults to know this. We want our teachers to know this. We want them to see how this process then can help children learn the modulation skills that are often so lacking when children are referred to mental health or child and family service programs. And by doing so, we're going to promote resilience in these children, help them overcome the tough times. Let's move on to the next slide. So the attunement we're trying to foster here is to an integration between parents and children, and very concrete. It's eye contact, tone of voice, gestures, facial expressions, contingent responses. Much as a parent responds to a baby, holding them and guiding them and responding coo to coo, and responding to the child with pleasure, pain. The emotional attuning that so many of our children have lost along the way. And we're going to try to rebuild that through these activities in a very safe way. Let's go on to the next slide. So moving very quickly then, again, now into the fourth and fifth component identified by the work group for complex trauma therapy. What we do in Real Life Heroes to address these components of self-reflective processing and positive affect enhancement is to do a number of what's often seen as CBT components therapy. Self-monitoring, we talked about psychoeducation, safety planning. We use a lot of some of the target materials, Freedom, SOS. We do cognitive reframing, some cognitive belief work with exercises and activities that come in the workbook and the manual. We're doing imagery and meaning making. Let's move on to the next slide. We also try to include as much as we can some mindfulness and focused attention works that's tied, again, to the developmental level of the child and to what the parents are interested in doing. We want to get to, hopefully, build the sense, as Bess Medical talked about, is that children can see that their feelings can be something that can help them, rather than something that they have to quickly avoid and block out and run away from or react to. Let's move on to the next slide. And we do so that we're using the mindfulness activities then as part of the Creative Arts and Attachment Center program that we're doing session by session, practicing with children and caring adults how they can use their feelings and get in touch and then be able to stay safe. So the whole process here then is, again, to grow the window of tolerance and to keep children and caring adults engaged to do this work. So trauma psychoeducation is a key component here, and the stress is how do we take the shame out of traumatic experiences. And so many of our children come to us thinking they're bad, they're damaged, and their whole experience with practitioners has been to confirm how bad, damaged, sick, or terrible they are. Let's go on to the next slide. We use the image in the literature. I got this from Julian Ford and others that tough times start the alarm bells ringing in our bodies. And this is like a handout we use, again, tied to a younger developmental level, elementary latency. And we use this handout with children, with adults, with teachers, because we want them all to know, get a sense of how tough times work, so that we can think about these tough times leading to knots inside us. Go on to the next slide. And that what we can use to help overcome this is personal power. And personal power comes not only by our own skills to think and plan, but by having safe, caring adults and friends around us to help. Let's go on to the next slide. But sometimes the tough times are so horrible that our stomachs may start to ache, our hearts feel like drums beating faster and faster, and they feel like they might explode, and our arms and legs feel as though they may burn. So we use this kind of a story approach to help children see this as the natural process in the development of traumatic stress. And we talk about the alarm bell growing and growing, and let's go to the next slide until it just grows and fills up the page. Let's go on to the next slide. And that's when it's easy to blow your top, lose your mind, get in trouble, even when you don't want to. And the only thing you may be able to do is to run away, or if that doesn't work, to get kicked and fight. So we're using this process, again, to normalize what's happened, and then to stress how children can use a skill development program to, like freedom from target and other skills, to overcome. And we use this within the heroes context, that heroes know that being hurt is part of real life. Bad things do happen, and sometimes good people get sick, get hurt, etc., and heroes fight for freedom, and heroes help others. So that's the context we're using here. Let's go on to the next slide. So now is the hard part, because we also know that just like developing the skill to shoot a basket or ride a bike, it takes practice. And if you practice it and practice it, then you get good. And that's what we're going to do in the therapy session. So we use the psychoeducation format to help frame for children and caring adults the process of what we're going to be doing in sessions. And that's to develop these skills, again, for self-regulation that we've been talking about, and expand the window of tolerance so that the children can then do the processing they need. So this, in terms of the safety plan, this is an example of our safety plan in the next slide. If you please go to the next slide, which includes the 5 senses self-soothing plan, an action plan to relax, and including people I can go to for help, because our children very often in trouble don't know who they can go to. So we want to be sure they have that, carry it with them. Have a sense, who can I go to during school, after school, evenings, nighttime, and have visits with different family members, to visit with another parent, etc. Every place they go. Next slide. So again, then we stress the practice and how that builds in with the Hero's Challenge of growing and growing. And the Hero's Challenge here is really a challenge to everyone involved, everyone who cares about that child, to help that child grow into a hero. Let's go on to the next slide, by addressing the components of being a hero, which is that we use the pain in our lives to grow, that recognize how emotions are natural. We want to release the power of their own thinking, open up options, and teach them again to be creative, to experiment, and then become, by so doing, stronger and stronger and stronger. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a life story approach. It's a strength-based approach. We try to tie it all the way through every aspect to the child's family, to the cultural heritage, and building and empowering. Let's go to the next slide. And the objective, again, is to do a transformation of a troubled child who's often causing trouble and scaring people into someone who can be helpful. Along the way, we want to really focus on that sense of identity within the family and with their background. The so many of our children have lost feelings about how they or family members can succeed. And this is especially true in child welfare, where we have underserved groups. And we want to tie into those underserved, to every group, a sense of strength for the child and people involved. So there's a couple of examples here. We, for African American youth in my area, which is Albany, New York, it's very easy to tie in the community history in terms of promotion of abolition of slavery, the Underground Railroad sites, local heroes. But most of our children don't know about that. So we want to help them recognize the heroes right there in their community, maybe even their neighborhood, where famous people lived and worked to make things better, right where they live. Similarly, let's go on to the next slide. Just as another example, gay or lesbian youth in child welfare, another underserved group. We want them to know some of the background, of some stories of strength and empowerment. So where's the triangle come from? How did that tie into history? How does that tie in then to overcoming persecution, and other stories and lessons of courage, whether it's the Stonewall riots or etc. Let's go on to the next page. We offer we want each child and every caring adult to have a heroes library. So we have books selected by age, reading level, ethnic heritage, matched to the children can then go to help them really get a sense, again, models of people who have overcome. And we look for those within each child, who they're interested in. So if they like the third baseman on the Yankees, we want to know, their book. If they like a famous singer, who do they know? And we want to use, again, also images and people and icons that are similar to them. So if they were adopted, we want to use, and they like Faith Hill, that's a natural. As an adopted child who then reconnected with her biological parent, etc. And we want to use that for every child and in every experience. Let's go on to the next slide. The workbook, by the way, has been translated also into Chinese. So life story work is a core component here, and is a way to address some of the key components in trauma therapy, the healing theory, as Charles Sigley talked about in the 80s, and how we can use memory to shape what we learn. Let's go on to the next slide. And the last component I want to address again from the white paper is how we can help children integrate their traumatic experiences. And so we do that with real-life heroes against the process of art, rhythm, tonality, and movement. A lot of nonverbal processing and then adding words. And we do that within the embrace of helpful caring adults, hopefully in the room, working with the child. So let's go on to the next slide about trauma processing. And this is just going to emphasize that what we're hoping to do here is use everything we're doing to expand the therapeutic window, to rebuild positive memories, and to use the safety we're creating to help children then to do the desensitization necessary, which is the very last part of the work in our process. Let's go on to the next slide. And I'm going to skim over this very quickly and just leave it as a reference. We're emphasizing here, hopefully, a counter-conditioning process. We're going to do a lot of our children, we have to approach loss and grief work. But what mostly want to emphasize right now is that the activities we use are to create safety so the children can address what it is in their background they need to overcome. Let's move on to the next slide. And this is done, and we do this again by sharing the journey, and that's with the repetition of these exercises in which adults can attune and then reattune with children. And hopefully that way we can go help the child grow with a caring adult, brain to brain. Now many of our children don't have a caring adult. And in those cases, a safe caring adult, in those cases we may be using the workbook to search for caring adults from the past. They may have lost somebody who died, they may have lost a grandparent who raised them and then moved to another place, or had to take care of someone else. We need to reconnect them with images and strengths from the past. But we always were thinking about this as a shared journey. Let's move on to the next slide. And the stories then are to help children make sense of what happened, to grow step by step. Let's go on to the next slide. And along the way, we are enhancing the power of caring adults who are going to be working with us on a parallel track to be strong enough to guide the child to overcome and to make this possible so that the child can feel safe and hope and trust. Let's move on to the next slide. And the sense here we want to stress here is that caring adults lead the way. And they do that through, we talked about the 3 R's, routines, rituals, reattunement, and really focusing on modeling and building a hero's identity for the child. So that we want to encourage parents to demonstrate the courage to face the horrors of the past. So as Beverly James talked about, to become the people who will protect, provide, and guide the child. And our job often as therapists is to search for, find, engage, and to link the child with people we can find within their family or, if necessary, from outside their family who can help guide the way. Let's go on to the next slide. And so within the process, the 3 R's, I want to talk about routines. We can address the behavioral factors that all our children need day to day, from waking up to breakfast to going to bed at night, so that they feel that now their home can be different than it was in the past. Let's go on to the next slide. And we do this also with rituals. Show each child how they feel safe and special, and to reaffirm their identity, and again, the sense of promoting that reattunement. Let's go on to the next slide. And so we're really doing, essentially, for many of our children who've had impaired attachments, we are hopefully helping the caring adults in their lives to reparent that child. And by doing that, essentially to create a new and different world. And those of you who are familiar, again, with Joseph Campbell know this fits right in with the hero's journey or the hero's quest that we see in heroic stories, whether it's in mythology or in TV dramas or whoever the child might identify now, from Batman to Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, Harry Potter, Luke Skywalker, whoever it might be, or a football star, dancer, or singer. So we're hoping to connect them, tie that child again into their family, to the faith, and that includes their community, hope, faith, etc. Let's go on to the next slide. And for parents, what we want to emphasize is that reparenting means taking the control back from the child and avoiding repeating what the child expects to happen again, which is the past traumas over and over and over again. So it's a reclaiming of the child, by the family, by practitioners, by extended family, by the community, and tying them to their family, to their faith, if they have a strong faith, to school, to neighborhood, to their ethnic heritage. And we're doing this, let's go on to the next slide, at the developmental level where the breakdown of attachment occurred. And that's what we're going to do. So let's work on it, moving ahead very quickly, and I know I'm running out of time. So we're helping children to succeed, and we're going to do that with the support of adults and help them to develop skills and talents. Let's move on to the next slide. And that's where the workbook comes in. So let's move on to the next slide. And we're going to do this then chapter by chapter. Each chapter then addresses skills the children need. So the first chapter begins with a pledge by adults. We begin with a pledge by adults that's going to be a doing with activity with safe adults, respecting the child. And the next first chapter we begin with affect recognition, affect modulation, and testing by the child whether they're safe enough to work with these adults. The third chapter is to use the model of the child's own heroes to develop a sense of hope and to start building affect recognition, affect regulation skills that they can identify within heroes and also within their family and within their ethnic heritage. The next chapter is to reconnect the child with people in their life who cared about them, who loved them, and kept them safe. And the next chapter is to reconnect the child with good times, with fun, with connections, with resources, with allies and skills that they had. The next chapter is about how they can put this together with new perspectives, how they can make things better, how they can use skill building and to overcome. Go on to the next page, next slide. And then we use a worksheet on the ABCs of trauma on the Hero's Quest to use essentially a CBT format for addressing the impact of trauma on beliefs and our bodies and how children can overcome that, and then how they can use that to change catastrophic beliefs and coping strategies, to rewrite their scripts, to practice using new strategies within a very low stressful situation, a therapy situation. The next chapter is about looking back, making sense out of the past, about all the moves and transitions in their life, and then only after all this do we start to address tough times. Now, what typically happens in the workbook, is as children start to become safer and feel safer within reattunement with adults, they spontaneously begin to share traumatic events. So typically, by the time we get to chapters 7, 8, 9, children have already begun sharing some of the worst moments, most horrific times with the adults in their life. That's our objective, is children will be able to bring this out when they feel safe enough. And then, again, using the metaphor of the window of tolerance, when that grows large enough that they can begin to trust it and to test whether the adults around them can handle what it is the child experienced from others and experienced within themselves. And this chapter about Through the Tough Times is essentially a desensitization process where we go through that to help the child structure in a more structured CBT manner to go through that, again, using the creative arts form. And the last chapter will be going into the future. So when I'm on the next slide, a couple of examples from the workbook. This is from chapter 1, and this is a sense about letting children share images of themselves showing different feelings, whether it's mad, sad, angry, kindness, caring. Feelings that they may be able to share easily or may not be able to share. And the therapist then can guide the work by knowing whether the child needs to work more in the area of affect recognition and expression or doesn't need to work very much on this. Going to the next slide, we're going to address how they can show feelings being brave, sad, frightened, angry. Now, if we're doing this with a caring adult, the key process here is when the child does these things, how the child watches the caring adult with them to see, is it safe for me to share feelings? And that includes with practitioners. And then to use those feelings as a way to work on modulation. We do each of these pages again within the structured sequence of that we talked about at the beginning with nonverbal activities, sketching, rhythm, and tonality and movement before we talk about words. So next in chapter 2, we invite them to think about a hero that they like, and helps, of course, then we can use as a model for building skill building. Let's go on to the next slide. Then we talk about heroes and heroines that they know in real life, hopefully that we can find. Let's go on to the next slide. And then we're going to use this process to help them build skills. So as an example, I think we started out with about the Band-Aid. And I would like to ask you to imagine that for yourself. If you were to draw your own Band-Aid, and to put on that Band-Aid, as you know, is for most 5 or 6 or 7-year-olds, and also for 15, 16, 17-year-olds who developmentally are at a lower level. Band-Aids work a lot better if they have a superhero symbol on them, something that makes the child feel better. So who would you put on a Band-Aid for yourself? A hero for yourself. It would make you feel better. So we would do this in a therapy session by allowing the child to imagine, and to draw, and to sketch. And then using that image would invite them to then, just looking at that image of that hero on their Band-Aid, to make a rhythm would go with that hero. And by doing this, as you know, what we're doing is really trying to expand and ingrain that sense of that hero figure for the child. And then when we add tonality, and again ask them to spend time sharing it in music, we're inviting them to use different modalities, different ways of expression, and to share that within the context, hopefully with a caring adult. And if we don't have a caring adult now, hopefully later on we will be able to bring in a caring adult so the child can share their image with that caring adult. So if a child is looking for an adoptive family or in a foster family or placement, or hoping their parent will overcome addiction, or they may not have a caring, safe adult now, but hopefully later can share their images. And that's the process we're going to be using. So going on to the next slide is an example here. We again want to normalize how we and all heroes and every man and woman and child needs help. So we help others, and we look for help from others. So we start to begin the sense of the child helping other people and what they can do now to help others. So we want them out doing and doing for others. Let's go on to the next slide. So along this process, we do family trees, but in a little different sense, using the roots metaphor, where we're looking for what helps a child to grow stronger. And as every gardener knows, when a plant has lost some roots, we want to try to regrow and rebuild. Roots in this concept includes pets, mentors, clergy, coaches, everybody possible that provides strength and resources for that child. So we're again developing that imagery of strength and safety for the child. Let's go on to the next slide. Our timelines, which is very important in child welfare when children have been moved all from relative to relative and often in and out of foster homes or residential treatment facilities or psychiatric placements. We want to help them get a sense of where they've been, in and out. So we include that as part of the workbook. Let's go on to the next slide. Also include in the workbook trying to build those memories of who helped the child to heal, including when they were sick as a young child. So did they use chicken soup? Did they use fried chicken? Did they use storytelling? Did they use a favorite song? We want to learn those songs and help the people that are trying to care for that child now to then do the same thing for that child now. So it's moving along. Then this naturally leads to who the child can go to now if they really needed help. And again, for each of these images, we're doing the same process of rhythm, tonality, and movement, and the therapist can guide this, tailor this for each child in terms of what's important to strengthen or what's already strongly in place. Let's go on to the next slide. So this is about a picture of someone who makes me feel safe and warm and good inside, and you'll recognize this in terms of safe place imagery from CBT. So we would do this in terms of drawing, and again, using a great deal of creative arts and non-verbal modalities. Let's go on to the next one. The ABCs of trauma. So in the next slide, we're talking about using words and beliefs, so in terms of cognitive behavioral work. And let's go on to the next slide as I'm running out of time. But the sense here, is empowerment, getting out of the trauma pit, finding a way out, and using a sense of normalization of tough times, how they can use, and hopefully a sense of verbal reasoning and thinking to make things better. Let's go on to the next slide. And to do that, we emphasize courage. Courage shown by the caring adults, courage by the child, to do things, to practice things, to essentially change their stories. Let's go on to the next slide. And the image we can use here can be like a detective trying to figure out what happened, and also as a director of a movie trying to change the story. So let's go on to the next slide. So when we get to the chapter on tough times, we can do then a sensitization approach. And the framework here, again, that we want to stress is empowerment, overcoming, and what they've learned. So we begin with a low-stress situation and ask the child to sketch a tough time, and then to begin to think about how they would express that with rhythm, with tonality, with movement. And I want you to envision we're trying to do this with a caring adult. So the child is then going to tap out a rhythm and hopefully hear that the caring adult can literally attune to them and copy that rhythm. And that the child can then tap out tones or use music, and that the adult can copy that music. And the same for movement. So the child feels this, again, is a shared journey, not something they're doing all by themselves. So on the next slide. And the emphasis, as we talk about in this slide, is how I've learned to do better, how I've learned skills. And from a sense of a movie, we would think about this in terms of a story, first scene, second scene, third scene, and how you could even make this into a movie. And if the therapist wishes, you could actually make a movie out of this with a simple camera or a video camera or a cartoon storybook. And let's move on to the next slide. We do include in the workbook feelings of guilt and shame again, the idea of the workbook is to make it safer so that we can bring in these components that may or may not be critical for your child. So a therapist can guide the work and tailor it to the individual child, the individual family, and their cultural background. And in a real easy way. And use components that are most important for that child and hopefully address all the key components then needed for complex trauma therapy. So I'm moving ahead very quickly as I'm running out of time. And going on to the next slide is about the future. Again, thinking about who the child will want to be with in the future, which is a good guide for us in terms of who we want to bring in. Let's go on to the next slide. I want to cover real quickly the research in our pilot study in my last couple minutes here. We did a pilot study on using the real life heroes in child welfare programs with high-risk home-based family counseling, therapy to foster family care, residential treatment, and an outpatient child guidance clinic. We had 17 therapists. We lost 5 of the therapists along the way. We had children who were seen in the developmental ages of 8 to 12, but they could be up to age 14. And we had 41 children, and 36% were living out of home, 41% female, and 53% members of an ethnic minority. Let's go on to the next slide. Like most of our work in complex trauma, 75% of these children had over 3 traumatic events identified on the UCLA PTSD Index, and over 75% were above a cutoff on the PROPS scale for PTSD symptoms. Go on to the next slide. We collected data at the initiation and 4 months, and 8 months, and 12 months from these children with a neutral observer. And let's go on to the next slide. Moving quickly here, in terms of results, we found that the children demonstrated reduced trauma symptoms on child self-reports on the TSCC, and fewer behavior problems after 4 months, which I think is a good statement of the power of the skill building and affect regulation activities. Let's go on to the next slide. We also found, which was very gratifying, which was that the more the child did, and of course as we've expected, the more the children and the caregivers did, the more they reduced trauma symptoms. That's a fact found in many other studies. And I think especially gratifying for us is that we found that security and attachment increased over time with the child. So let's go on to the next slide. So we find here that the props, that the scores, the measures of PTSD drop down significantly. And let's go on to the next slide. That on the TSCC, the measures of this child's self-reported trauma symptoms drop down over time. The next slide, we see that the child's sense of security increased over time. These are all gratifying. The next slide, even more important for me are the stories. Children reporting, a greater sense of people there for them in their lives. A girl who was asked in her classroom about what would you do if there was a fire in your house, what would you take with her, and she listed her Real Life Heroes workbook as the most important thing she would want to take out of her home. There was a fire. Not so much as this workbook, but it contained the positive memories and images of people who loved and cared for her. Let's go on to the next slide. This is a pre-experimental design. Did not have a control group. Doesn't prove that Real Life Heroes made this change. But it does have a high level of generalizability to what we see as the everyday real-life world in child and family services. These families are not self-selected. There was no response. They were not responding to ads for services, and they, in almost all cases, were not seeking mental health services without some kind of mandate from some authority, like a judge or CPS. Families moved away during the project. We were delayed getting started by months, and we lost 3 staff right in the middle of work and 5 staff overall. I want to go on. And just to summarize some of the key points we found in our research that seem to make a difference in the work with children and child and family services is that we need to address rebuilding attunement so that children can feel safe enough to develop self-regulation skills. So we do a lot of work on searching for and finding and helping caring adults come in and help children and become safe enough when necessary, when they're not safe, to be able to validate and protect and guide children. And by doing that, we find we can rekindle hope and work on nurturing relationships and rebuilding the strengths and skills for these children, and create the safety necessary for these children to then be able to do the desensitization and trauma processing that we need in complex trauma therapy, reintegrating the child's nurturing memories, and also be able to reintegrate and reduce the toxicity of painful memories. By so doing, we help the child change their images and their memories from nightmares to stories of healing, and hopefully their identities from victims or victimizers to heroes helping others. So at this point, I think I want to stop talking, and I hope I haven't lost people, and I hope you've been able to advance slides going along with this. So let me stop talking, and I'd be glad to take any questions.
And this is just a reminder that if you do have questions, you're welcome to email them to question@nctsn.org. You can also, on the media site presentation, click on the Ask button on the screen, and we'll get those questions here. I do have one question that's come in from Tricia Ver. She asks, what developmental ages would this be appropriate for?
And that's a great question. And the workbook itself was especially designed for developmental ages of 6 to 12. And what we found is we work a lot with adolescents. And we've been able to engage adolescents very easily by a number of different things tailored to each adolescent. It might be saying, this is a workbook that was geared for younger children, but maybe take a look at it. And we want to do with it because the adolescents we use this for are adolescents who might be 15, 16, 17, but who are functioning socially and emotionally at a younger age level. So where I work, we may have 15, 16-year-olds who are functioning very often at 1 to 2 or 3-year-old levels and are in a residential treatment facility requiring intense guidance and supervision, or they might be functioning at a 3, 4, 5-year-old level. So we use this frame. We find it's very easy to engage into adolescence, again, because of the safety the structured curriculum offers. And then we can use the workbook in many different ways. So with older adolescents, we might even just refer to the workbook because each of the pages are really activities that then promote the skill building we want to use, and we can then tailor that to the developmental level of the child. So we might be using the kind of music they're into. We might be involving them how they're writing poetry, or these at different age levels. And for another child, we might be talking about again touching fabrics to keep them comfortable, or having photos of themselves with people that made them feel safe and warm, or using play objects or puppets that, again, fit their developmental level. So we can use a wide range of developmental levels, but the workbook is generally geared for a developmental age span of 6 to 12.
Great. There's another question here from Heather Rodriguez. She asks, what do you recommend when the safe, caring adult or parent also happens to have their own trauma past that may not have been addressed, but they're working to rebuild their attachment with their child?
We really welcome that, because there you have a parent who's aware and is working. And we will encourage, and I didn't emphasize this enough, that part of the parallel process with the caring adults is to encourage each of them to do their own life story work. And they can do that using a copy of the workbook, or they can do that in a more adult manner. They may want to make a movie, they want to make a narrative story. We encourage the adults with the framework of the adults leading the way. So using the adults' power to reason and understand and the psychoeducation, we encourage them to essentially go through the same process. And we structure sessions so that the caring adults can do these activities with the child, but also have a special time with the practitioner, if possible. And again, we have to tailor this to what practitioners can do in a given agency or clinic or facility. Some clients may be working in their own therapy, but we try to help the caring adults, and do this within by promoting an understanding of traumatic stress and how that works in the child's brain and for everyone, and normalizing that, I find it's very easy to, it helps to take away the shame and the guilt that often blocks caring adults from reattuning to their child and from helping their child deal with stresses that the adult has had trouble dealing with. So the more we can help the adults identify their own triggers, their own traumatic stress, and how they're overcoming it, doesn't mean they have overcome it, but that they're working on it. Because the sense here is that we're promoting is that the caring adult is a hero figure, somebody who's going to help lead the way, and using the images in their own life to their own heroic figures in their own life to promote that image.
Okay. I have a couple more questions here, Richard.
Mm-hmm.
I had from Linda Nieslin. She asks, what is the average length of time you work with a child using this model? And is one therapist working with a child and the various caregivers?
That's a great question. We typically have one therapist working with the child and with the caring adults. And the length of time really varies tremendously by the level of resources for the child. I want to say primarily. The child has a safe home and a caring, committed adult. The child has already shared the worst of their traumatic story, and a judge believes them. You're way off, and you can go pretty quickly through a lot of this process. But most of the children that we see have not really yet told or shared the traumas in their life, and they actually start to share the stories and the traumas within the safety and the guidance of our wonderful therapists. And with the caring adults, we're able to bring in, showing that it's now safe to share those stories. So the children, this depends on the level of impairment in the attachment, the level of impairment in terms of the developmental age of the child. So we have many children our agency who might be 15 or 16, but acting at 1, 2, 3-year-old levels, hitting, kicking, biting, running away, doing dangerous things, putting objects into different parts of their body, cutting, and etc. And there we're often talking about children who really need a lot of work to build a new attachment, or for a caring adult who's coming back after traumas to rebuild an attachment with a child that has been lost often for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So the process then can take 12, 18 months. The process of working through the workbook, the whole workbook, can typically take somewhere between 8 to 18 months, and this varies tremendously again by the level of security and resources that a given child has. What therapists can do, however, is they can take portions of the workbook that they think are most relevant for their child. And if you're using another therapeutic model, you can use tools from the workbook to enhance work on a particular aspect, like affect recognition, affect regulation, or developing a sense of the hero's image, or developing memories of people who loved and cared for you. These are all separate chapters, and they could be used distinctly for a more time-limited work, or to be tied into other models. So the approach really can be adapted in many ways. These are tools to help engage children and families in a variety of systems. But the overall process, from beginning to end, typically as in Child and Family Services, in our experience, has taken between 8 and 18 months. And again, we're working with children with certainly with complex trauma, and often with very impaired attachments who have not yet disclosed the trauma in their lives and don't yet feel safe.
There are a couple of questions that have come in asking about how the workbook and book can be obtained or purchased, and how much it costs.
The workbooks are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Hayworth, strictly from Hayworth Press, Taylor and Anderson. They can get discounts from multiple books purchased in an agency. I think the new workbook, I forgot what it is, but they're always available at a discount, and then at a major discount. So it might be between around $20 to $30 for a workbook. I want to talk about some of the tools, expenses for tools and equipment, because that's a factor in most agencies like my own. Peacock feathers, very cheap, available online. Drums very cheap, bubbles very cheap. We get no bells and xylophones for about $18 a piece. So things that even in a child welfare agency we can often afford to do, puppets and things you may have already available to make this process work. And so there's a practitioner's manual, there is a workbook, there is a text for building attachments, useful to have in an agency.
Okay.
And for many of you who were involved in the Trauma Network years ago, when Parsons had funding, we were able to disseminate these through our own funding.
Mary Dino asks, if a child has successfully gone through the process with a foster parent and subsequently is returned to the parent, causing a temporary spike in symptoms, do you revisit or redo the process?
Well, we would want to work. I mean, ideally, we would be wanting to work if a biological parent is working on reuniting, which is very typical in our work in foster family care, then we would hopefully be working with the biological parent on doing this process with them all along the way, and hopefully with the guidance of the therapeutic foster parent or the foster parent, as hopefully as a model. If we don't have a safe caring adult and may not even have an adult, we maybe started the work with the foster parent first as a caring adult, and then we want to gradually bring in the biological parent and work with the biological parent in that parallel process I've been talking about, so the biological parent develops the skills and the strength to overcome traumas in their life and to help their child as a process, part of the process of reuniting, and which is really focused on overcoming the factors that led to the placement. So this is all tied into the permanency work within a sense of the family therapy and permanency process, so that the trauma therapy, complex trauma therapy, is tailored to the permanency work. So hopefully the child wouldn't be abruptly sent back to a biological parent without any of this work. But in the real world, that does happen. And in that case, hopefully the biological parent could still be engaged out of caring for their child to work on this process, and might be then with another clinic or agency, and again, hopefully the foster parent could play a very positive role in this process.
Cheryl Des Montañez, and I apologize, I'm probably saying her name incorrectly. She's asking, you had referred to children not having a caring adult. How do you address this in the therapeutic process if one is not found during the time working with children? I work in a school setting, so it would be during the school year. And she also says she just thanks you for a wonderful presentation, and she's finding it helpful on a number of levels.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm really hoping this can be used more in school settings, and we have our own school here at Parsons Child and Family Center. But the process, we are searching. We are just continue the search. And I think the main thing here is to keep hope alive for the children, because the children who act the most dangerous ways, in terms of running away or doing dangerous things or becoming involved with dangerous other people and being hurt themselves or hurting others, typically they feel they have nobody. So the more we can keep a sense that we are searching, we're going to find somebody, that's really important. Now, of course, that ties in with the permanency work. And many of these children don't have a sense that people are out there really trying to help them have a family of their own, somebody that's going to be there for them. And in that case, so part of our role as practitioners is to be advocates to the people that have power, such as county authorities, judges, etc., to be doing, if a child, for instance, has nobody and is in an impermanent group care or a similar situation, to be looking for somebody. And we use the workbook process by identifying memories of who was there and who they'd like to be there for them in the future to hopefully connect that child with them. So if a child says, we find out from a child that severe behavior problems occurred when an older sister went away, and I'm thinking of a youth, for instance, who stole 13 cars in one day, and that was after his sister left away, moved away. And so our work is very easy then to think about who we want to try to re-engage as much as possible in the real world to be a support to that youth, whether it's through phone calls, through use webcams now, storytelling if the person has died. We want to learn about them. learn about how they overcame hardships in their lives, and reconnect the child to what helped that person become strong in their own life, wherever it was that the child identified with. So when the child says, I felt good and I felt cared for when Grandma used to make the chicken soup for me, or the fried chicken, or the special recipe, that's the person we want to help the child learn about and care for. Even if that person has died or moved away, we want to help the child learn more about them, develop skills to, as much as possible, to reconnect them in every way possible. And again, when I say reconnect, doesn't mean necessarily the child's going to live with them, but to have the best possible relationship with them. And if a child is in permanent care, group care, foster family care, I want to hopefully get a sense that each child leaves that program with somebody, somebody. Now, if we're working within a school day, school program, that may have one bring in other people as much as possible, also to help in this search, the child and family services people or mental health people, to add to what you can do within the school day.
Great. Well, I think that covers the questions that we've received. I want to thank you, Dr. Kagan, for a wonderful and informative presentation. We'd also like to thank SAMHSA for their ongoing support of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And this is the final event in the NCTSN Complex Trauma Speaker Series. As Jennifer Mays mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're currently developing a schedule of presentations that will begin in the fall on a variety of topics related to child and adolescent traumatic stress. Some of the speaker series that will be launched in the fall include a speaker series on creating more trauma-informed service systems and one on terrorism and disaster. If you have suggestions for topics that would be of interest to you or your colleagues, please complete the online participant survey. And thanks to everyone who's participated in the NCTSN Complex Trauma Speaker Series. Please check out our website at www.nctsn.org for information about upcoming series. And just thank you again, Dr. Kagan.
Thank you, and thank everybody for listening.